The last mistake of the Xeran Dominion. The bridge of the Xeran Dominion's grand warcruiser, the Dreadspire, was tense. Every officer present, from the elite tacticians to the highly decorated battlemasters, stood in rigid silence, awaiting their High Lord's command. They had encountered something unexpected, something primitive yet oddly defiant. A human vessel. High Lord Kethralak, Supreme Commander of the Xeran Dominion's military forces, watched the viewing screen with cold, analytical precision. The vessel was laughable. Small, unassuming, barely even worth noting in their conquest logs. Its design was nothing like the warships of the more advanced civilizations that had already bent the knee to the Dominion's rule. And yet, it stood its ground. Kethralak flicked his segmented fingers in the air, activating a holographic analysis of the ship. Humanity, he mused, his voice layered with a deep guttural resonance. His second-in-command, General Vexa, stepped forward. A newly discovered species, my lord. They have barely expanded beyond their own system. Their technology is crude, at best. The High Lord's mandibles twitched in mild amusement. And yet they did not retreat when our fleet arrived. A young tactician of the controls spoke up. They are requesting communication. Shall we ignore them? Kethralak's mandibles curled into a cruel smirk. No, let them speak before we incinerate their vessel. Perhaps they will beg. Humanity's first and last warning. The view screen flickered, and the image of a human appeared. A male, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark military uniform, with golden insignia shimmering under the low light of his bridge. His expression was neither fearful nor desperate. It was calm, controlled. That alone made Kethralak pause. "This is Captain Ilias Voss of the UEN Resolute," the human said, his voice even, steady. "You are trespassing in a restricted sector of space belonging to the United Earth Navy. We ask that you adjust course and vacate immediately." For a moment, there was silence. Then laughter erupted across the bridge of the Dreadspire. A few of the Xeran officers struggled to contain their amusement, but Kethralak allowed it. He turned back toward the human. "You dare give us orders?" Captain Voss did not flinch. Not an order. A warning. Kethralak leaned forward slightly. "And what exactly will happen if we refuse?" The human's face remained impassive. "We will respond accordingly." More laughter. Kethralak shook his head. Primitive species. Their bravado was amusing, but ultimately meaningless. "I do not think you comprehend your situation," Kethralak sneered. "We are the Xeran Dominion. We have conquered more than 100 civilizations, each greater than yours. We do not recognize your claim to anything, let alone the authority to order us." Voss exhaled slowly. His next words were measured. "Then I suppose there is nothing more to say." The screen went dark. The Xeran attack. Kethralak let out a huff of amusement, his mandibles clicking in anticipation. "Lock weapons on the human vessel," he ordered. General Vexa tilted her head slightly. "Is it really worth wasting power on them? Their shields are barely functional. We could swat them out of the sky like an insect." The High Lord waved a dismissive hand. "Make it an example. Let the wreckage serve as a reminder to the lesser species of what happens when they resist." The bridge crew complied. The Dreadspire's primary weapons began charging, energy conduits pulsing with power. In moments, the human ship would be nothing but debris floating through the void. "Target locked," an officer reported. Kethralak raised a hand. "Fire." The unexpected counterattack. The instant the Dreadspire's plasma cannons discharged, something strange happened. The human vessel moved. Not in a way that warships usually moved, not a desperate retreat, not a last-minute shield reinforcement. It dodged. The plasma beams seared past the hull, missing entirely. Kethralak's eyes narrowed. What was that? They performed a lateral drift using precise thruster bursts, my lord. An officer stammered. They predicted our firing path and... Another shot. Another dodge. They are reading our targeting algorithms. That was impossible. A just firing solution. Kethrelak snapped. Do not let them evade again. His gunners recalibrated. The weapons fired in rapid succession, plasma streaking toward the Resolute like bolts of lightning. Then, it disappeared. A collective gasp rippled through the Xeran bridge. The ship had just been there, and now it was. Above us. An officer shouted. Kethrelak's head snapped upward just in time to see the Resolute descend from above, plasma turrets roaring to life. Before he could react, the first volley struck the Dreadspire's shield array. And for the first time in Dominion history, a Xeran warship's shields failed against a primitive race. Humanity wasn't fighting fair. The Xeran Dominion had always relied on their technological superiority. Their enemies fought by their rules, using weapons that obeyed predictable patterns. But humans never played by the rules. Their ship didn't follow established combat protocols. It moved erratically, unpredictably. Their weapons weren't standardized plasma barrages. They used something else. Kinetic weaponry. While the Xeran had spent centuries perfecting energy-based warfare, humanity had taken a different path. Projectiles moving at incredible speeds, shells lined with devastating uranium-tipped cores. And now, the Dreadspire was experiencing exactly why that was a problem. A second volley of railgun rounds struck the Xeran cruiser's hull, tearing through the armor like paper. Kethrelak's amusement had vanished. Damage report. Shields at 40%. Outer hull compromised. Impossible. This is a fluke, Kethrelak growled. They got lucky. But it wasn't luck. The Resolute wasn't just dodging. It was hunting. The realization. Kethrelak's confidence wavered for the first time. He had dismissed the humans as insignificant. But now, his flagship, the pride of the Dominion's fleet, was taking damage from a single vessel. This wasn't supposed to happen. This isn't possible, General Vexo whispered. They are adapting. The crew faltered. No Xeran officer had ever experienced an enemy adapting mid-battle, outmaneuvering them at every turn. And yet, the humans were doing just that. Kethrelak turned to his officers. We need reinforcements. Now. But deep down, he knew the truth. Reinforcements wouldn't change anything. Because the humans had already done the impossible. They had won the first engagement. And now, the Dominion had something they had never faced before. A real war. The Xeran Dominion's worst nightmare. The bridge of the Xeran Dominion's grand warcruiser, the Dreadspire, had never known such chaos. Alarms blared. Sparks rained from overloaded control panels. The acrid scent of burnt circuits filled the air. And on the main view screen, the impossible. A single human warship had done what no species had ever managed before. It had crippled a Xeran Dominion vessel in open battle. High Lord Kethrelak gripped the edge of his command throne, his claws digging deep into the polished surface. His once unused sneer was gone, replaced by something far more unfamiliar. Doubt. This is a statistical anomaly, he muttered. A fluke. But no one on his bridge was laughing anymore. Because the UEN Resolute was still out there, and it was still hunting them. A broken empire's first real war. Across the Xeran fleet, officers scrambled for answers. Every recorded battle in Dominion history told the same story. The Xeran attacked, their enemies either surrendered immediately or were destroyed within minutes. But the humans hadn't surrendered. They hadn't run. And now, they were winning. General Vex's mandibles twitched as she examined the damage reports. Shields are at 12%. We've lost 3 of our main plasma batteries, and Deck 12 is. A violent tremor shook the ship. Another impact. Kethrelak turned to his weapons officer. Return fire. Everything we have. Plasma turrets unleashed a furious barrage, a wall of energy designed to engulf and incinerate anything it touched. But the Resolute moved like a phantom. It dipped low, thrusters burning hard, cutting under the Dreadspire like a knife through shadow. The shots missed again. Kethralak's patience snapped. How are they dodging us? No ship moves like that. The answer came from one of his junior tacticians, his voice shaky. My lord, we believe they are using predictive maneuvering. The bridge fell silent. What? The tactician swallowed. They aren't just evading randomly. They are reading our attack patterns, anticipating them. Kethralak's mandibles twitched in rage. That's impossible. No species can process targeting data that quickly. But Vex's 4 black eyes locked onto the human ship, and she whispered, unless their computers are unlike anything we've ever encountered. Kethralak froze. That would explain everything. The rapid dodging, the unnatural precision, the way the Resolute seemed to know what the Xeran would do before they even did it. Humans didn't just fight, they learned. The art of asymmetrical warfare. The Xeran had always relied on brute force. Their empire wasn't built on strategy. It was built on overwhelming power. Their war doctrine was simple. Superior technology. Superior numbers. Immediate victory. But humanity had never fought by their rules. The Resolute wasn't stronger than the Xeran ships. It wasn't more advanced. It wasn't even bigger. But it was faster. And it was smarter. Inside the Resolute's combat bridge, Captain Elias Voss stood with arms crossed, his expression unreadable as his crew worked in silent, surgical precision. Targeting solutions locked in, said his weapons officer, Ensign Halvorsen. Enemy shields are nearly gone. If we hit them again, we might take out their. Hold your fire, Voss interrupted. The crew paused. Sir. Voss's gaze remained fixed on the Dreadspire, watching its movements, analyzing its desperation. Something's wrong, he murmured. They should have retreated by now. Commander Rain, his second-in-command, narrowed her eyes. You think they're planning something? Voss nodded. They don't know how to lose. They've never had to. Which meant they were about to do something reckless. Helm, get us clear of their firing arc. Now. The Resolute veered hard to starboard, thrusters roaring. Just in time. Because at that moment, the Xeran revealed their trump card. The Dreadspire's last gambit. The entire hull of the Dreadspire began to shift. Panels moved. Energy conduits realigned. Then, a surge of blue light ignited from its core. They're overloading their core. Commander Rain shouted. Voss's heart slammed against his ribs. They're turning the entire ship into a bomb. The Xeran had realized they were losing. And now, they were trying to take the Resolute with them. The impossible escape. Inside the Dreadspire, Kethralak let out a cold, resigned breath. This will be our legacy, he murmured. If we cannot defeat them, then we will show them what happens when Xeran vessel falls. Vex's eyes widened in horror. My lord, wait. But it was too late. The overload sequence had begun. A countdown appeared on every screen. 30 seconds to detonation. Inside the Resolute, alarms screamed. Captain, we need to retreat. We won't clear the blast in time. Voss's mind raced. Think. Then, an idea. It was insane. It was reckless. But it was the only chance they had. Reroute all power to rear thrusters, Voss ordered. Commander Rain's head snapped toward him. Sir, that will drain our shields. Voss didn't hesitate. Do it. A race against oblivion. The Resolute's engines roared to life, pushing past their safety limits. The ship lurched forward, accelerating faster than it was ever designed to go. The Dreadspire's explosion ignited behind them. The shockwave ripped through space, consuming the remains of that Xeran fleet, hurling debris in all directions. The Resolute outran it by mere seconds. Inside, the crew was thrown violently forward as the ship barely cleared the blast radius. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, slowly, the crew began to cheer. Voss exhaled, his grip on the console tightening. Status: engines are fried, sir, Rain panted. But we're alive. Voss allowed himself a small smile. That's all that matters. The aftermath. The Xeran Dominion had lost. For the first time in their empire's history, they had suffered a defeat in open combat. And now they knew fear. Deep in the Dominion's core worlds, their warlords would be forced to answer a terrible question. What if the humans weren't just lucky? What if this was only the beginning of the end for the Xeran Dominion? A shockwave across the stars. The destruction of the Dreadspire sent a ripple through the Xeran Dominion. It wasn't just a military loss, it was an ideological earthquake. For centuries, the Dominion had crushed every civilization that dared stand against it. Victory wasn't just expected, it was assumed. The Xeran had never lost before, not once, in their recorded history. But now, the impossible had happened. A primitive species, barely beyond its home system, had faced one of their mightiest warships, and won. The news spread through Xeran space like wildfire. Across the Dominion, warlords, admirals, and planetary governors watched the battle reports in stunned silence. It made no sense. How had the humans done this? Their ships were weaker. Their fleets were smaller. Their weapons were crude, outdated kinetic projectiles. And yet, the Dreadspire was gone. More importantly, the fearsome Scourge drones, the Dominion's greatest weapon, had been rendered useless. The realization settled deep into the hearts of the Dominion's ruling class. The humans weren't playing by the rules. They weren't fighting like everyone else. And that made them the most dangerous enemy the Xeran had ever faced. High Command in crisis. Deep in the core systems of the Dominion, the Xeran High War Council convened in an emergency session. The chamber, a massive obsidian-lit war room lined with holographic displays, was usually a place of strategy and power. Today, it was filled with barely contained panic. Seated at the head of the great war table was Overlord Kreth Solar, the supreme ruler of the Dominion. His dark, segmented exoskeleton gleamed under the cold lights, but his usual aura of invincibility was absent. Before him, holographic projections of the battle logs played on an endless loop, every detail of the battle replayed over and over again. The human ship's erratic movements, the Dreadspire's futile attempts to land a hit, the Resolute's relentless precision strikes, and finally the desperate self-destruction of the Dreadspire, a last, bitter attempt at vengeance that had failed completely. "This is unacceptable," growled Admiral Xilvorn, his claws curling into the table. "The humans should not be capable of this." "They should not," Kreth Solar agreed. His voice, normally calm, was now taut with something dangerous. A warlord from the outer colonies leaned forward, mandibles clicking anxiously. If a single human ship can defeat a warcruiser, what happens if they send an entire fleet? No one had an answer. For the first time in Xeran history, no one knew what came next. The mistake the Dominion couldn't afford. Despite the panic within the War Council, the Xeran still clung to their arrogance. They assumed the humans had simply gotten lucky. They assumed this was an isolated event. They assumed the Dominion could crush humanity before this defeat turned into something more. They were wrong. Because even as they debated in their war chambers, humanity had already made its next move. Back in human space, a dangerous decision. On board the UEN Resolute, Captain Elias Voss knew exactly what was happening within the Dominion. The Xeran weren't just licking their wounds, they were planning retaliation. They couldn't afford to let that happen. "Captain, we're getting priority transmission from Admiral Kestrel," Commander Rain reported. Voss nodded. "Patch her through." The holographic display flickered to life, revealing Admiral Victoria Kestrel, Supreme Commander of the United Earth Navy. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Congratulations, Captain. You just made history." Voss remained impassive. "With all due respect, Admiral, we're not done yet." Kestrel gave him a thin smile. That's why I'm calling. You started this fight. Now, we need to end it. Voss raised an eyebrow. You have a plan. Kestrel's eyes darkened. We're going to do something the Xeran have never had to deal with before. Voss tilted his head. And what's that? She smiled grimly. A preemptive strike. Humanity's next move. The Xeran won't see it coming. For centuries, the Xeran Dominion had dictated the rules of war. Their enemies waited for the Dominion to strike. Their enemies cowered, hoping for mercy. But humanity was different. They weren't going to sit back and wait for the Dominion to retaliate. Instead, they were going to strike first. Across Earth's military outposts, fleets were mobilizing. Hundreds of warships, a force unlike anything the Xeran had ever encountered. And unlike the Dreadspire, these ships weren't alone. The Dominion expected one human fleet. They were about to get dozens. Inside the Dominion's heart, the calm before the storm. The Xeran warlords still believed they had time. They believed their fleet was invincible. They believed humanity couldn't possibly have more ships like the Resolute. They were fatally wrong. As Overlord Kreth Solar prepared to launch his retaliation, an urgent warning signal echoed through the war room. A fleet officer rushed forward, his face stricken with disbelief. "My lord," he stammered, "human vessels have entered Xeran-controlled space." Silence. Kreth Solar turned slowly. "How many?" The officer swallowed hard. "Hundreds, my lord." The war room erupted into chaos. This wasn't supposed to happen. The Xeran Dominion had never been invaded before, and yet now, for the first time in history, they were the ones under attack. Humanity strikes back. At the head of the invading human fleet, Captain Voss stood aboard the bridge of the UEN Ironclad, watching as the first Xeran defense stations appeared on the tactical display. He turned to his crew. "No warnings," he said. "No negotiations. We don't give them a chance to recover." The order was given. The human fleet opened fire. Across the Dominion's borders, fortresses burned, warships crumbled, and defenses collapsed. The Xeran, for the first time, were running. And in the depths of space, a message was sent to the entire Dominion. Humanity was here, and they weren't going anywhere.